Hello and welcome to another episode of the To Baldly Go podcast. Thank you for joining us on our mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to baldly go where so many have gone before. My name is Aaron, and I am on my first trip through the universe of Star Trek, watching a few episodes each week and discussing them with my wife Abbie and our friend Nate. Come along this week as we discuss the next 3 episodes of Star Trek, the original series, A Private Little War, Return to Tomorrow, and Patterns of Force. Now, take us out of orbit, Mr. Sulu. Should we talk about some Star Trek?
We should. Let's
All
do
right.
it.
All right. Yeah. Three episodes that were in varying levels of quality, I thought, starting with A Private Little War. Yeah, kind of nothing to this episode. I think because I had to give it a rating. I gave it a 5 because I just thought it was mediocre. Like there were bits of it that were like interesting, kind of funny, intriguing, and then bits that were like kind of rapey. So it was kind of all over the place and just kind of nothinged the episode. So yeah, give it a mediocre, call it a 5.
Yeah, I mean, I gave it a 7. I'm trying to remember why. I do remember it, you know, it started off kind of slow for me, but I did feel like it got better towards the end. Again, you have kind of this, it's the same trope that we've seen in previous episodes where they kind of show up on a planet and the Klingons are meddling with things, and then it's the power struggle of, in this case, it's them trying to put things back originally to the way they were, but by the end it's well, I guess if the Klingons are going to supply one side with weapons, we're going to give the other side equal weapons so that we just kind of keep everything in check and one doesn't overrun the other. And I don't know, maybe I need to think that. But
I felt it was kind of a weird message. I mean, it's one of those shows where Star Trek on the whole, where they seem to be very progressive. They are very diplomatic, but willing to fight when they need to. And I felt like in this episode, they were kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth. Because at one point, it's like they're talking in a very, very anti-war type stance. But then they do a hard pivot to like, mutually assured destruction is the only way, and go like heavy pro-war. So
it's
it
a
was just
very
like
Cold War-esque stance.
very, very much. But it was like, do they even know what their messaging is here? Because it seemed like in one moment they were like, this is very bad, and then jumped very quickly to this is the only way. And not just that, but let's escalate like for like, which I understand, and I understand that notion, but it seemed a bit, I don't know, just odd.
Trying to figure out why I rated this episode so high now that we're talking about it, because I have notes around a lot of this, right? And I agree with you that it was just, and now I don't understand what my thought process was. I mean, I literally just went back and double checked my rating for it. Like, did I?
Yeah. No, there were some things I thought were like interesting in it. Like you see some more background for Kirk. He had a history there.
Yep.
Was his history just as an observer? No, he was friends with the guy.
Yeah, he was interacting with them.
He was interacting.
Which
I did find it interesting at the very beginning. They talked basically like, hey, we can't use our phasers because of the Prime Directive. I don't remember what terminology they used. So they settled for throwing rocks, which seems to be pretty much also interfering.
Well, like, let's talk about the whole concept of they have to put things back to the way they were because of the Prime Directive.
Yeah.
Which tells us, we've had these instances where we've learned that for whatever reason the prime directive doesn't apply because it's a stagnant culture, right? And so we didn't establish that in this episode, which means
Right.
they aren't a stagnant culture, which means the prime directive applies, which means the fact that Kirk had this friendship with Tyree and Tyree knew who he was
Mm-hmm.
in of itself is a violation of the prime directive.
Yeah.
I don't know why I gave this a 7. I'm gonna change it to something else. I honestly have no idea.
I gave it a 7.
Yeah, I don't know why. I'm gonna go with 5. I'm gonna agree with Aaron.
Yeah. It was
I don't get
there were some okay like things to it. And even in okay, it's more like, oh, I like how they were consistent with that.
yeah.
Where Abbie, when we were watching it, was just like, why is there a big green spot on Spock? It was like, because he got shot.
Yeah.
And I thought it was great that they had the green blood.
Mhm.
There was no hole in the shirt. It was
Yeah.
like a stain.
Yeah.
Like
he got
there was
shot
no
in the
like
back.
blown out. Okay, but he's bleeding in the front. Aaron said from an exit wound or whatever. So I'd expect like some sort of an exit.
And there was
wound through
blood on the
front.
back
It was like,
too. I think this is also where, as you said when we started watching the episode, this is not made for a 70-inch TV. And where we see some of that in basically high definition. You get a standard definition TV that's 19 inches, and you're not gonna notice or care. And I think that goes back to a couple episodes prior, the Gamesters of Triskelion, where don't step on the other color, and they're just like, screw that, we're just gonna go wherever we want and story be damned. So I think it's more of that, and they probably didn't want to waste a uniform.
It is really funny that you mentioned the high def thing, because I know we talk about that a lot, especially when you can see stunt doubles and things like that, like very clearly. Well, that's a different person. But even as I was sitting there, I think I watched this on Saturday, and Katie and Ellie were kind of milling about and doing whatever. And Katie looks up or not Katie, Ellie looked up and said, "Why does the guy with the pointy ears have skin that looks so weird?" And it's because his makeup looked so awful in high def. Like it looks
wasn't
so
that
bad.
Was
so
it
cakey.
maybe a point for him to look bad because of
But even in
having
normal
been shot, or just always?
just always, like it was a point where Spock was healthy. And
and you have to think, though, they were doing this for screens that were not high def and anything else, so they had to have that level of makeup to be able to really see the expressions and things like that, and see the movement. So
well, and I just remember anecdotally, it tells you again how things changed or have changed over the years, that when all the local TV stations started broadcasting in high def, when they were able, that switch to digital, and then they could start doing 1080p and all that stuff, and you could actually watch this, watch the local news in high def. They had to change all the makeup they were using. They had to use different makeup.
All the news news anchors. They
It
and
looked
some of them were
terrible.
allergic to it.
Yep.
Like whatever the news stuff was, a whole bunch of them, like they were allergic and couldn't use it. And so I remember, seeing articles and hearing stories about this at the time, but it just tells you that, whatever they were using before doesn't work when you're doing things in high def. Like I'm going through my notes. And just little things. War isn't a good life, but it's a life. Just that resignation, though. I guess, whatever, we're gonna do this. I mean, I like the Mugatu. Kind of reminded me of the snow monster from Star Wars, which again makes me wonder that's another one of those things that got ripped off from Star Trek and put into Star Wars.
So, a funny piece of trivia I'm looking up on this one says it was originally called the Gumato in the original script, but
Yep.
DeForest Kelley kept saying it wrong, so they changed it.
Oh, way to go, McCoy.
Another thing, and I wonder if we'll see the effects of this as we proceed. Apparently, this was the last production credit for showrunner Gene Kuhn, who resigned halfway through the season. And his replacement, John Meredith Lucas, apparently struggled to come to terms with the show's unrelenting schedules and the budget cuts that Paramount was insisting on. NBC was also unhappy about the show's implications about sex, threatening the airing of a show that was already on the borderline of cancellation. So, yeah, as we've discussed, the show got canceled in season 2 and then brought back. Apparently, NBC wasn't too happy with some of the things that I think we've probably discussed over and over again to this point, but also their showrunner left after this episode. So I can't imagine it goes uphill from here on the whole, even though both of the other episodes this week I liked better.
And I also think it's interesting that this one was written by Gene Roddenberry. And historically, I need to go back and look, but I think historically, we have not loved Gene Roddenberry's episodes.
There's real irony there, right?
Yeah, really is. It's kind of a mixed bag. Aaron, Abbie, I don't know what you gave as a rating for this, but unless it's like a 9, I think this makes it the lowest Gene Roddenberry written episode, but not by much.
I was gonna give a 4 is what I think I was leaning towards. I didn't enjoy it. I barely tolerated it, I guess. I really think Aaron should just start writing down what I say without realizing I'm saying it out loud as we're watching these things together, because I'm pretty sure I outburst quite a few things.
I would love to hear that, and that is
like,
a vote in favor.
Just like random stuff that I say without even realizing I'm saying it. Because he just kind of starts laughing at me.
You didn't even say much in this one. It was more like just
guttural, like, ugh.
Yeah.
Just deep. I think I had a lot of deep sighs on this one.
I think you pointed out when the lady was getting attacked at the end before I think she got killed, right? But you were basically saying how, or you kind of groaned at how another kind of like assault on a woman scene, and I mentioned at that point, I was just like, man, with the plant she was using on Tyree and then doing the same thing to Kirk later on, it was kind of a rapey episode at the guys.
It really was.
It
was full of strife. That is for sure.
Yeah.
It was the violent. It was the violent. I think there's not to say one's better than the other. I'm not trying to say that by any means.
No,
but it's very reminiscent of the episode with Uhura where she's getting attacked behind the wall and stuff like that, or in the cell. And so it was just very easy to be like, ooh.
Yeah, there was. Yeah. I just felt with this episode in particular, there was not a whole lot that worked. Yeah, I could even downgrade it, but I'll just give it a 5 and say it was mediocre, because there was some, like, seeing Chapel slapping Spock, that was kind of funny. And him,
whatever I say, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
Or do whatever he says.
Yep. I thought that was kind of funny. I didn't have too many notes on this one, just because there wasn't that much thought after it. It was kind of in and out.
The previous episodes that we haven't loved of Gene Roddenberry's, Maud's Women, the Menagerie got very mixed votes from us, and Return of the Archons.
Yeah. high marks from Abbie on that one.
Very high. And I think that's about it. The only one that we actually, I think, enjoyed.
Cage.
Yeah, the Cage. It's a two-way tie for the Cage and Charlie X, which is technically written by DC Fontana, but Gene Roddenberry has co-writing credits on that one. So
Gotcha. I don't really have anything else on this episode. It was just,
yeah, I'm good.
Why don't we, since we don't have a lot to say on it. I feel like we didn't really say anything about it, honestly. So do we have trivia, anything like that on it at all? Do we have things that we absolutely over the ones about it? Anything like you actually disliked, or is it just nothing for you entirely?
I mean,
pretty much.
I think these are the episodes where we start to understand why it was canceled, right?
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, in general, I should go back and kind of do some, some math behind this. But in general, season 1 collectively we rate the episodes pretty well. Like there are some outliers where we don't like them as much. The alternative factor. But I mean, collectively, we generally like them. And now we get into really 4 episodes in a row now that we just disliked overall. Gamesters of Triskelion, Piece of the Action, Immunity Syndrome, we actually generally liked. Like that's the highest of the 4, and then you get into a Private Little War, right? So you get one kind of golden one in there, and then you throw it, 3 others of the 4 that are kind of trash. We, Trouble with Tribbles, we generally liked, unless your Aaron is wrong. But we didn't like
Wolf in 8.
But Wolf in the Fold prior to that, we disliked.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think that's you make a good point in how you say that. I can see I can in watching these, I can see why people love this series and love these characters. Although I might say they probably seem to love the series and love the characters off of maybe 40% of the episodes. But
and arguably there aren't that many episodes, like compared to the other series, there aren't that many episodes.
I mean, there's a total of 80, I think, in the entire series. We're over halfway through it now. And yeah, like you said, I can see watching through season 1 why people love the show, how they could come into it years later, say not born in the 60s, and still love the show. I'm new to it and I'm enjoying it a lot. But at the same time, like you said, I can fully appreciate why this got canceled. Season 2, as I was just looking back through my notes earlier today, just realizing, season 1, I think I rated as a 7 overall, which was basically what my average score was. And this season, so far, I'd say leans towards a 6, being just okay. And I don't know if I would imagine my ratings will fall right in about that line, maybe even a little less, but probably end up rounded up. It's just kind of the feeling I have on it.
I mean, not without doing like actual.
It's just it's season 2 this is not a series that got better with season 2. It felt like they hit their stride partway through season 1, like we've discussed before. But season 2, I think, you said it perfectly. I can see why this got canceled.
Yeah, I mean, you have the exact opposite. Season 1 was there were a few crappy episodes strung amongst, overall
a lot of good episodes and some great episodes.
And now we flipped it. There's some great episodes in the season, but they're strewn amongst some really terrible ones.
Yeah. Like Cat's Paw.
We see a lot of repetitiveness in this season. So I hate to say that we've run out of future ideas, but they kind of did a little bit. They kind of got
Yep.
stuck. And so they ended up going back and doing a lot of historical episodes. And so instead of being a futuristic show, we ended up having a commentary on the 20s gangster, or, Nazi Germany.
Are we already skipping ahead to Patterns of Force?
No, but
We've got one more in between, but yeah.
But last week we had the gangsters of New York last week. So I think we had two. I mean, even this episode, we had the flintlock guns and the primitive, how we handled this. In the next episode, they'll talk about, well, we also handled their nuclear war situation, and we did this and this and this. So they, I think there was a direct reference, I think, in this episode to two jungle peoples fighting. Like, they were absolutely, like, we just called it out in this one as to whether that be Korea or Vietnam, but they just flat out said what it was in this one. So I think it might have lost a little bit of its like sparkle of ingenuity for looking forward, like the excitement that it could bring, like what is the potential, instead of bringing it back to being cautionary tales of our past. It was far more of that, which I believe are the episodes we disliked in season 1, were all ones that were historical episodes, like the Shakespeare episode. I don't think you guys liked very much. And then
I liked it less
any of
than
the
you
ones,
guys, but
yeah, I like the Shakespeare episode,
but even is it Miri's, like the Miri one? That one was set in an old style Earth again. So any of those ones are historical, we tend to not appreciate, because if we wanted to watch a history movie, we'd be watching a different show. They'll probably portray it more accurately.
Well, yeah, and I think you kind of make a good point there. I've found more and more as these episodes progress, I'm writing a note like, we've seen this before. I mean, they change a couple of the details, but the basics are the same. Even in the next episode, Return to Tomorrow, early on I wrote down a note. Just, it was before they revealed that these were beings in these orbs or whatever it was. But I just wrote, is Kirk going to talk a computer into suicide again? Because that's kind of the initial feeling that there was before they went to the music for the opening and all that. So I think that's a good segue into Return to Tomorrow, and then the historically based episodes definitely will come into play in the third episode. So the second episode, Return to Tomorrow, I like this one better. I was between a 6 and 7, kind of undecided. I thought it was at least okay, nearing good. At points, at least. What are your thoughts?
It's very funny because I watched this and I was trying to think of a score for it, because there were things I liked about it and things I didn't like about it, and I was also trying to decide between a 6 and a 7, and I split the difference and did 6.5.
Yeah, I'm only doing whole numbers.
I could be convinced to go up or down a half a point, and I'm not sure which.
Well, we'll figure it out through discussion, I guess.
So I'll dissuade everybody. I actually kind of liked it. So I gave it a 7. Like, I didn't like it.
So she gave it a 5.
I liked it higher than normal. I will say I spent a solid first half hour of the episode trying to figure out how the heck I recognize this actress, and going around and around and around in my head. I'm like, what have I seen this actress in? And then I finally had to pause it to look her up. I was like, oh my God, it's Dr. Pulaski from Next Gen, who takes over for Gates. But it was the voice. Like, I didn't necessarily recognize her, but she's got the same exact mannerisms, and she like
a lot.
She does. But it was the voice. It was the voice and the delivery on it is what had me completely distracted. I was like, why am I so fascinated by this actress? And I did find it funny. She was a doctor in this one and that one.
Yep.
My criteria for these have definitely, like, I'd be curious if my rankings were rewatching season 1 again, having seen the rest of the seasons and how it's going to kind of go. Because now I've set my bar a lot lower, I think, than first season, in that if it doesn't have a massive yuck factor in it or a massive cringe factor, I rank it much higher in its watchability scale. This one had a plot. It was clever. It had that kind of twist. You may have seen it coming. We all kind of did. It was fun seeing Spock not be Spock to me. I thought that was fun. That was a fun play.
Where he can be something different.
I made that exact note that it's always interesting seeing the characters taken over and acting uncharacteristically.
And I mean, one of the notes that I made too is I loved just given their relationship throughout the series, how quickly Spock hits on Chapel when he wakes up. Like he looks at her and he's like, "Hey there," like without fail, and she's all happy because, like,
right. But then they did the cringe factor at the end a little bit with the shared a mind. It was just weird.
I think it's funny that you say this one didn't have so much cringe factor, yet these alien bodiless beings took over the bodies of Kirk and Mulhall. Was that it?
Mulhall.
So they could have physical contact through them. I thought that was rather, well, just
after the first time they asked, and they didn't do anything inappropriate per se with them. So, I don't know. I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah. No, I'm with Nate here. I could easily see this one being a 7. I think I initially, my gut reaction was a 7, but then I was like, I don't know. So that's why I wrote down a 6 or 7. I thought there were a lot of good, interesting things in this one. There were some, I had to pause it and start looking up some dates because when Kirk was giving his little speech about, they used to say if man could fly, he'd have wings, but he did fly. He discovered he had to. Do you wish that the first Apollo mission hadn't reached the moon, or that we hadn't gone on to Mars and then to the nearest star? So I had to look it up. I was just like, okay, when did this air? And this episode aired on February 9th, 1968. At that point, there had been one Apollo mission. There may have been some unmanned ones, but it was Apollo 1, which ended in a fire on the launch pad with the 3 astronauts dying in January of 1967. So it was like, oof, was this written before that or what? There wasn't another manned or crewed Apollo mission until October 11th of 1968. So what, 8 months later, that Apollo 7 went up, and they only orbited the Earth. It wasn't until December, around Christmas of 1968, that Apollo 8 made it to orbit the moon. And then Apollo 11 wasn't until July of 1969. So it's interesting that they kind of called that shot on the show before it had even happened. And actually, to that point, it had only been really a failure. They hadn't been to the moon at that point. And as far as the Apollo missions were concerned, they had 0 successes and 3 deaths.
But I think they were really high on the
prospect.
The prospect. Kennedy, had some very motivational speeches leading up to the Apollo program.
Absolutely. And said we were going to make it by the end of the decade.
Yeah, and so that was the big rush, and it's the space race, and we're competing against Russia, and we're trying to get there. So of course, from a Amerocentric standpoint, we got there. Like, of course we did. There's no other outcome, and we're frankly, it's just lucky they didn't say on the show at that point that we beat the Russians to the moon. But there was no other option in the 60s other than to land on the moon before the decade was out and beat the Russians in the process. No other option.
It made me think a bit of the final season of Parks and Rec, where I think it aired in 2015, but they jumped ahead to 2017. And they're talking about all these things that happened. And they talked about how the Cubs won the World Series the year prior, being 2016. So this aired in 2015, and it actually happened in 2016, like they had said. Made me think a little bit of that. And I just found it interesting because I was curious when he made the comment, the first Apollo mission reaching the moon. I was like, okay, when were those missions relative to when this aired? And for some reason, I was thinking this was later in 1968 that this aired than it did. I didn't realize it was in February.
Well, we've made this mistake a few times when we start talking about Vietnam too, right? We always we're much deeper into the Vietnam War than we really are. Like the conflict has not even really started at this point. So
I just thought that was interesting, kind of noteworthy. That they kind of were making claims like that had not yet happened. And there you go back a little bit to the hope that the show can have, and that positive outlook, especially after seeing some of the ones that have, say, more negative outlooks.
One thing that I wasn't sure, man, I think Kirk managed to kind of resolve it for me, but at the time it bothered me a little bit when they were talking about the prospect of switching bodies with Sargon and the two others. And Kirk was back on the ship and he's all for it, right? Like, we have to do this. And McCoy and Scotty are much less enthusiastic about it and trying to talk him out of it. And he's like almost over the top, like, we definitely have to do whatever they are asking us to do, to the point where I almost wondered it at that moment if Sargon was still in him and like managed to mask the echoey voice thing. And I mean, I think we established that he wasn't, right? And it was almost completely, tied back together with a neat little bow immediately after that, when Kirk, starts talking about the line is, risk is our business. That's what a starship is all about. And I thought, it's an interesting way to justify doing what he's talking about. I don't know if it completely justifies it for me. I mean, yes, they're doing something that is inherently very, very risky. And they're, in this episode, are hundreds of light years beyond where humankind has explored before. It still seems a pretty wild risk to take two of your top officers, and then another, prominent scientist, and be like, hey, let's do a body switch, right? We're going to put you in the glowing orb things, and like, pick somebody else, pick some lowly Richard ensign that you don't need.
They did address that though. They're the most compatible. They scanned them. But
it's still a weird plot device, right?
It is. But I'll say this though. I think we're thinking about it from the term of, what is the role of the captain and his first officer team? And unlike the newer series and stuff like that, where it's a command structure where the commander stays behind the lines as a general does, I think we've kind of seen this overall. They're almost like everyone else in the ship is support roles to the commanders, who are supposed to be out, supposed to be doing things, going through all the motions. So it's supposed to be those command people doing all the actions, and everyone else is there as support. So they're not there to lead the other people. They're there to do the things, to be behind them, I guess. So I think it's a different way of it. They are meant to be the primary explorers, the primary doers. And that's how the ship was designed, or the intent of that structure was designed, versus the newer seasons where it's like, no, first off, the captain doesn't go on every away mission. That doesn't make sense. So I think it was pretty consistent with
I just
them being on every planet.
I think that newer versions of Trek figured out that was a really stupid plot device, is what it came down to. William Shatner has an ego and wanted to be, in the middle of everything, no matter what.
That's probably fair.
Yeah. I don't know. I did like the way they addressed that though in this one. I of course liked Kirk's speech in the middle.
It's a great speech. I just
It
don't
is.
think it justifies his decision.
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. He does really point out like this is what we are here to do. Um,
Sure.
because he says Dr. McCoy is right in pointing out the enormous danger potential in any contact with life and intelligence as fantastically advanced as this. But I must point out that the possibilities, the potential for knowledge and advancement is equally great. Risk is our business. That's what the starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her. So, I mean, he's like, we are out here to learn and to expand knowledge and bring that back to people. And the only way that will happen is by taking risks.
So
So
maybe I approach this from
now that doesn't mean that it's not a silly risk to take, maybe, but the justification is there and addressed. It's not just like, oh, he's being some egomaniacal guy who's just, like you said, got to be at the center of everything. It it is him maybe just justifying it, but also explaining it like this is what we signed up for, and we know that there's inherent risk in it.
Yep.
Taking it a step further, Nate, you said, we'll let somebody else do it. That's completely contrary to anything that he's ever done or any captain's done. No captain would say, hey, this is too risky for me to take this risk on. You need to take this risk on. None of them would ever do that.
But I would argue that if it was so risky at that point, then they shouldn't be doing it to begin with.
But I think you go back to that,
But what if they can
decision of the
get
captain again.
what if they can get some crazy altering level of knowledge from it? There's a reward that they've determined may outweigh that risk.
It's fair. And I think one of the ways I think I end up approaching this that's maybe a little bit different is I'm in the business of risk mitigation. Like my entire world revolves around talking to organizations about risk levels and mitigation strategies and what do you do with your so-called crown jewels, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing to protect those? And when we talk about senior staff on a starship far from home, like your senior staff are in a lot of ways your crown jewels. Like they're the ones with the skill sets and the experience to be able to get the rest of the ship home safely, pretty much regardless of any circumstance. So when you start to put them in what I consider to be undue risk, and I think maybe that's the difference here, but what I would consider to be undue risk, that seems like a bad decision. So that's just
and I think there I just go with that they thought the potential reward, the potential that could come from that, the potential for knowledge and advancement of that was as great or greater than, was equally great to the risk.
A timeline that I missed in there for how quickly they had to do this? I'm trying to decide if there was we'll bring them back with us to Federation space. We'll take them to a starbase with better facilities, yada, yada, yada. Like we'll make this a broader decision than just us.
I think there was something that had them stuck on a timeline, though it wasn't so tight. Because I think they made a point. One of them said, I think Sargon said at one point, like, we've waited 500,000 years. What's another couple hours?
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like we got to move on this yesterday, but we can wait till this evening. But I think they were also, maybe I'm confusing my episodes, but I thought they mentioned something where they were at a point where it would take weeks for a message to reach anyone else. So I mean, you have to think in this universe where they don't see they've bypassed the limitations of physics and speed of light travel and getting messages back basically instantly, regardless of where they are. They were far enough out that they were weeks away from even a message getting through. And I could be completely making that up, but
yeah, no, I mean, they did say that in the beginning of the episode. They were trying to relay back that they were responding to this distress signal. They didn't understand where it came from, why. They wanted to send a report back. Uhura says that it will take weeks.
Over 3 weeks at that distance.
Yep.
So, that's a very good point. Did I miss where you said that they will make, if they get distress called, they will risk everybody's lives on that ship in order to save people who actually have a distress signal?
Yeah, I mean,
so how is this any different than that situation? Other than risking the entire ship, they're risking 2 people's lives to save 3 people.
I think it could have been established better.
I just didn't like it, is what Nate's kind of doing with his arms and his shoulders. I just don't like it.
It doesn't work for me. So,
yeah.
I don't know. It bugged me.
Now, a couple things on this one that stuck out to me, and I don't know what was meant by it or what I think was one of Sargon's first lines is saying that he's as dead as the planet and asking if that frightens Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "For if it does, if you let what is left of me perish, then all of you, my children, all of mankind must perish too." I was curious about that because it's not you will, but you must.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't considered the word difference there. I definitely
is that a threat?
Their God type.
What I don't know is if that's saying, if I can't survive this, then there's no way you ever will, and as a result of that, you must die.
But
not saying it'll be today or tomorrow, but as a result of this, this is the net result of this, regardless of when that is. But is he saying, if we can't make this work for me to live, then you're all gonna die too, and you have to.
Here's the problem with that. By the end of the episode, they're all dead, and we never talk about that again. So what are the implications of...
They're not dead.
Yeah, they are. They disappeared into oblivion. They are dead. They killed Henoch by forcing him out of Spock's body without any place to go. And then Thalassa and Sargon share one more moment together before they disappear into oblivion. That is the end of the episode. So I guess, must is a little more subjective than will perish.
Did you guys, so because I got stuck up on the trivia here. Did anyone recognize the voice of Sargon?
No. Is it someone famous? Who is it?
Oh, it's someone you know. Do you want to take a guess? Any guesses?
I have no clue. I mean, I could go Google it, but that'd be cheating.
It was Scotty.
Uh-huh. Well, because he doesn't actually have a Scottish accent, so he could normally know.
James Doohan.
Huh.
Yep.
That's wild. He is a man of many talents. Did you guys know that he wrote the Klingon language? We haven't really gotten to that in the show.
They speak English, though, so that's really impressive.
Yeah. He literally created English. I don't know. But in later, I don't think it shows up until the movies. But there's an actual you can go learn Klingon. I'm pretty sure if you download Duolingo, it's a language that you can pick from. It's got a full grammatical structure and all that stuff. And James Doohan put all of that together. He created it. You can also learn Klingon at the Concordian language camps in Moorhead, Minnesota. You can take a summer camp in Klingon.
Did y'all catch the
I'm
deep
doing a
biblical
Star
references on
Trek-
this one?
Sorry.
I was going serious still.
Oh,
Did y'all catch the deep biblical references on this one?
Yes, the Garden of Eden stuff, and
It got even more in depth. I didn't even realize some of it. So her name Henoch is a variation of the Hebrew name Enoch,
Yep.
which Book of Genesis was the man taken bodily to heaven without dying.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting with how he ended up being killed. Okay.
They actually made the comment about on to Mars and so on, and they filmed more than a year and a half before the first lunar landing. The first manned model mission never flew. Tragic fire claimed the lives of 3 astronauts. It happened on the 27th of January, months before the script was even submitted to the production team. So they were just taking a leap of faith on that, Aaron. That's the timing on it.
That's what I figured.
Oh God, there was actually that android body was actually a human, fully covered in latex.
Like cover it in Vaseline
latex
or something. Like it was so
Encased
shiny.
in latex spray.
Ew.
Except he had air holes for breathing. He was never named. No one knows who he is.
Oh my God, that's like they found some stagehand to be like, hey, we're gonna like strip you down to the waist, and then we're gonna cover you in latex, poke a couple holes so you can breathe. Just lay here for a while. That sounds great. You talk about the twist that you see coming. Like, I think we all saw that he describes Henoch as, the leader of the other side, that came together to, try and save their society overall. And it's like, oh, well, so he's going to betray them. Like, that was my first thought. Oh, wait, he did try.
This is going to end well.
Yeah, got it.
I got nothing more on this one.
The temptations within a living body are too great. Thought that was a good line.
It's an interesting, if you want to go down like the deep, warm, fuzzy piece of it, of how important is physical contact within love? Can you have a fulfilling, loving relationship without the ability to have contact with one another? And how much of a drain that is on people. Like Aaron brought it out, he thought it was a bit rapey that they use their bodies to, you know what I mean? It was like
I wasn't saying that as much nefarious in this episode as the last one, but more that I just thought it was interesting that you didn't find that cringy.
I did find that cringy a little bit on the previous episode. I just didn't like the direct violence of one. For some reason, it's hard to watch the violent piece. Then maybe I'm desensitized enough by TV or whatnot of the subtle, not even gray area of it, but just the more subtlety of that style. But it was the direct violence of it, which I think unarguably watching violence is harder when it comes to things like that. Yes, I'd imagine. But just the simplest touches I think they did a really good job, both him and the actress. I don't know. I thought they portrayed the characters well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I will bump this up to a 7 just to get that half point out of here. I enjoyed it. Like, I think it's a good episode. I think, despite my, challenge with, I get the plot device of having Kirk and Spock be the ones that take on these orbs of consciousness or whatever, but
does Spock not make the most sense though? Like you already said, he's got a higher metabolism, a higher everything like that. So Spock makes sense.
I'll give you that because for sure, right? He can actually handle the strain on the body.
And then didn't he say Kirk was because he was one of the most fit on the ship? His heart could handle it longer. I think he said something like that. One of the best specimens on the ship as far as strength and being like toned. But he's arguing.
That's the case. But again, I don't know. You're telling me that there isn't in Kirk's in his mid-30s at this point. There isn't some. Again,
I'm not saying it's accurate, but I'm saying that was their argument for it. Was like obviously William Shatner's the fittest person on this ship.
And look,
and the security guys are always dying. He might be. You never know.
Wouldn't be the first time William Shatner jumped in and said, like, no, I'm doing this, right? We haven't gotten to the episode where that's the thing, but I think it's coming out.
You know what? you make a really good point, and I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit to Star Trek in a whole, or as a whole, in that entire mentality, like you said, and completely shifts
Mhm.
with newer seasons, and it changes the entire dynamic of how these episodes go. It's no longer the, the triad or the quad of these actors on every single episode. It becomes a every week story following the life of one character, and they own the plot. They are the protagonist.
It's it's a true definition of an ensemble cast, right? Where
Exactly.
this version of Star Trek, it's Kirk is the main character, and everyone is really the
He's the
support.
sheriff.
Yep.
It is that Western in space style
Yep.
still. And I know we keep bringing it up, but in
Well,
episodes like this, it's very
that's
clear. You've got the sheriff, you've got the deputy, and you've got the Met, you've got the, what do you call it, the country doctor,
mhm,
literally. And so that's every Western mentality. Everyone else is just tertiary to that. Whereas
that's fair.
it makes a big swap and change to, this is Crusher's episode, or this is Will's episode, and they're also very different in how they look at things and what their roles and responsibilities are. So I think I'd be curious to see what Aaron's take is on that, and whether or not he'll like kind of the lunacy of some of that too. Because some of
Mhm.
the episodes in the next, series, they're not always serious. A lot of times they're not serious at all. It's just,
Yep.
this is a struggle this random person's going through today. It's a Tuesday for them. Let's follow them on a Tuesday. It's their day. So
Speaking of all that, did you notice that Sulu is back?
Was he back in
he's
this
done.
episode? I
Yeah.
don't think it.
Is he done filming
Yep.
his other movie?
I did have a couple other thoughts on this episode and some of the like philosophical concepts they bring up in this, and it comes to a little bit almost of the Fermi paradox, which is like, why don't we, if there's intelligent life out there, why don't we see it?
Mhm.
And Sargon is talking about how whatever happened so long ago that all their records were lost in the cataclysm which we loosened upon ourselves. And he said, we survived our primitive nuclear era, but there comes to all races an ultimate crisis which you have yet to face. One day our minds became so powerful we dared think of ourselves as gods. And there is discussion about, like, if there is life out there, presumably at some point it would evolve into intelligent life and would eventually try to expand and take over its own planet and then its solar system and move out from there. And there should be some indication of that happening. So then the question is, why don't we see it? Is it because it doesn't happen? Is it because there's some great cataclysm that falls upon any type of life? I mean, you got to think there's a lot that there are different benchmarks that life needs to get past, and it's that single cell, multicellular, all that stuff. And so is it possible that we are literally the only civilization that's ever made it past that point in the entire universe? Or is there something between where we are now and interstellar, intergalactic travel that we have yet to face that wipes out every civilization that ever gets to that point, or at least knocks them way back? Which kind of sounds like that's what they're saying happens here. He's just like, yeah, we did this to ourselves, and here we are. Which again is why I think he may have said that if you can't fix this, if we're going to perish because of this, then you also must perish.
Right.
Because it's like we've reached that insurmountable barrier that nobody has been able to surpass to this point.
Well, even take it a step further. Why did they fail in this case? Because even at the end, the other side, as they said, they never, even after their entire civilization was lost, half of a millennia, they've been waiting, and they still can't agree on basic fundamentals enough that it destroyed them all.
Mhm.
It wasn't
Like,
half a millennia, it was half a million years.
I'm sorry, half a million years.
500 millennia.
500 millennia. I knew they said millennia. So that I think is going off of what you were saying with that question, or you have no chance of survival. If we can't figure this out, I think it's that cautionary tale. Like, if we can't make this work and we cannot find a way to do this, history will repeat itself. Even Spock said that tracks with what we thought about our ancestry and our origins on stuff, but it tracks more with the heightened metabolic rate and all that kind of jazz that the Balkans have and everything as well. So it is interesting to think about that concept of even such sophisticated they did themselves in with just inability to meet in the middle or even just change.
Yeah. One last thought I had, going completely silly on this episode, unless somebody has something more serious. I'm going with a 7 on this one. I think it was a good episode, plenty to think about, and it was just good.
I was going to debate the Fermi paradox further, but
go ahead,
because there's another option, right?
There are plenty of options. I'm just saying that's one of them that they basically brought up in this.
Yeah, I mean, it is, the age-old question of, why haven't we found it, right? And one of the other reasons could be that life elsewhere in the galaxy, in the universe, wherever, could look so different that we wouldn't recognize what it is.
Oh yeah, there are other arguments that by the time we would see something here, and by the time whatever we become will reach that far out, it won't be biological life that's doing it. It'll be some other capacity.
If you pay attention to what's going on in the Mexican parliament over the last 2 weeks, not only is there alien life, they have visited us and they have bodies. Guy literally rolled them into the Mexican parliament.
What?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
It's fake news, but that literally happened. Like, there's no way these things are actually real. But go look up this guy that presented to the Mexican parliament evidence that aliens not only have visited Earth, they are currently living on Earth, and he has the bodies to prove it. They look like little paper mache spacemen. It's been making the rounds. So, this is on the heels of all the congressional hearings around whatever we call UFOs these days, UAPs or whatever the hell they are.
After the unclassified docs are released or whatever.
Yeah. Which is kind of a big load of nothing, of like, we've got a bunch of photography of stuff, but we don't know what any of it is, and we can't figure it out. So we don't know what it is. But yeah, if you want a good time, go look this guy up. It's not the first time he's made similar claims that have been debunked, and he just did it again within the last 2 weeks, if not the last week. So the Fermi equation holds true according to him. So that's all. I just wanted to debate that point. Right.
So going silly on this, when Sargon is talking about how 6,000 centuries ago they were colonizing the galaxy, just as you've begun to do by exploration. And he said, as you now leave your own seed on distant planets, so we left our seed behind us. Perhaps your own legends of an Adam and an Eve were two of our travelers. I'm sorry, the way he said that, I couldn't help but think of the initiation episode of The Office, when Dwight brings Ryan out to the beet farm and says, and just as you have planted your seed in the ground, I am going to plant my seed in you. And Ryan looks up at him and says, I don't think you know what you're saying. So that's what I thought of when I heard that.
That's pretty funny. That is very funny.
All right. Yeah, good episode. I thought.
Yep,
I thought.
Okay.
All right.
Anything else you want to add to that one, or move on to?
I think we can move on. And I made a note in this one that before we started doing this, if you had given me a true or false question and said, true or false, there is an episode in which Kirk and Spock dress to pass themselves off as Nazis. I would have leaned heavily into false. Now I've seen enough that it really didn't surprise me. Like we've seen enough where they go back, and we just watched one where they went back to the 20s and were gangsters and all that. And we've seen them back in the 30s and in the 60s and all of those. So it wasn't particularly shocking, but just having that thought back of, before we started watching any of these, if you had said that there was an episode in which Kirk and Spock dressed up like Nazis and pretended to be Nazis, I would have probably called bullshit on that and been wrong.
I mean, I probably would have. Well, I probably would have. Having never watched Star Trek before, I probably would have. But
yeah,
obviously, tainted.
Knowing what I know now, I wasn't all that surprised by it, though. It is a little shocking.
No. You got it wrong. There's Nazis in space. Now you could have guessed
I
it.
suppose they were in space.
Space Nazis.
They were space Nazis.
Space Nazis.
Now it's understandable.
On this call gets that reference, like can translate that back to a movie, I'll be really impressed.
What was that?
Space Nazis. I hate space Nazis. Clue is replace space with a different word, and then you'll get a movie quote from the best movie ever made. In my opinion, it's my favorite movie. Yeah, no one's gonna get it because neither of you has probably even seen it.
What is it?
The Blues Brothers.
God,
it's one of Aaron's favorite movies.
I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites. I haven't seen it in a long time. I love that movie, but
I love it. I can pretty much quote that movie line for line, the entire thing.
I've wanted to watch that one again. I just haven't gotten around to it. I haven't watched it in probably 15 years, but it is a fantastic movie. They had that when I worked at Office Max in high school. They had a VHS tape of that in the break room, so nice. I would catch like bits of it every shift I worked in like 15-minute increments.
It is no joke my favorite movie. Like, I have watched it hundreds of times, and I could continue to watch it over and over and over again.
It is very good.
So it's a underrated movie for sure.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
one of the best musicals ever.
For sure. Great soundtrack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So we have Space Nazis.
Space Nazis.
I actually like this episode. I
did too.
You two felt about it. Like, I really wanted to dislike it because it's like, oh God, we're gonna do a cat's paw episode about goddamn Nazis. Like, I really wanted to dislike this episode. And I think I kept trying to find reasons to dislike this episode, but I actually kind of liked it.
I was in a very similar boat. I wasn't actively trying to dislike it, but I kept thinking, like, why do I feel like I like this episode? Like, there was nothing about it that I wanted to like, but somehow what they were doing, it worked as an episode.
No, I mean,
at the same time, there were a lot of things in it that just felt like, okay, we've seen all this before in different ways, but I don't know. There was it was a little jarring seeing, like, not just we could have told they were Nazis by the uniforms without the swastika armbands. And that, I think, was a bit jarring to see because we don't really see that much now.
Maybe it's a sign of those times, but I also had the same thought of that's not a thing. Like, even you look at the Marvel movies, right, where they clearly have Hydra, which is clearly an offshoot of Nazis.
What?
I know.
Hydra's an offshoot. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
And even they, use some stupid octopus logo that looks nothing like a swastika. right? I mean, we definitely in this day and age shy away from any of those images and things like that
It
because
was
of the
only
connotation.
20 years earlier,
Well,
guys.
yeah, I was
No,
thinking
that's
about
the
that
wild part
too.
about it.
I was like thinking about that today. That that would be like Al Qaeda.
Yeah,
I mean, like,
times 100. I mean, but
oh
yeah,
yes,
it's the
but trying to
closest
just say
example of that.
relative to something, an event that happened or ended, happened 25 years ago. It's like that's late 90s. I mean, we didn't have anything obviously to the degree of World War II, but yeah, just crazy to think about how relatively close that was in time. I mean, they were not that far removed
Almost everyone
from the end
watching
of
the
World War
show
II.
had some memory of World War II and the Holocaust,
Yeah,
given their target audience, right?
yeah,
I mean, hell, James Doohan fought in World War II,
right.
so that's
Yeah,
how
and then
recent.
I wondered like, okay, how was and then I suppose he really wasn't in this episode, but I was like, yeah, I wonder how
Yeah,
that was for doing this episode when yeah, it was it that's where again it was like I don't want to I I don't know why I thought this was a decently good episode. I
yeah.
think I gave it a 7 because I thought it was good.
And this goes back to where I tried to find reasons to dislike it
Yeah.
because it was very clearly meant to be a World War II Holocaust Nazi Germany episode,
Oh,
given the fact
absolutely.
that the the planet that everyone came from that they were trying to round them up and kill them were the Zayons, which is oddly close to Zion, by the way.
Hmm.
Let's just call that out. And all their names were
And there's
very,
Isak and Abram.
yeah, very vaguely Jewish, right?
Vaguely.
Like
Oh, and
we're
then
just gonna change the letter
so
here and there.
they changed the spellings, but then they just went full
Um,
on with the final solution. It was like Jesus.
yeah.
Uh,
Um, yeah, it's just like I said, I kept trying to find reasons to dislike this by like, okay, they're trying to draw these parallels and yada yada yada, and clearly this is some ridiculous trope that is inappropriate and they shouldn't have done it. And then I still kind of like the episode, and I don't
I
have a good
think
explanation for that.
I think it was
Um,
very well executed.
yes.
I think it was just a well done, well made, well executed episode. And
So
that's why we can say we like it. Because yeah, it felt really weird seeing them wearing those Nazi uniforms, knowing yes, they're being spies, they're infiltrating, they're doing all that, and that's part of it. But yeah, it felt so weird. But they did a good job in the episode.
yep. Now I will say, just I'm sure nobody knows the answer to this because they're not, you know, you guys aren't that big of a nerd that you paid this much attention. But do you know who wrote this episode?
James Doohan.
No, and not
Oh.
Gene Roddenberry either, by the way. But it is a callback to a comment that you made earlier, Abbie. Um, One John Meredith Lucas wrote this episode.
Who?
Oh, the new showrunner.
Yeah, the guy who took over for Gene Kuhn. Remember earlier in this episode, this recording, you talked about Gene was out and
I
John Meredith Lucas was in.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Oh, was that you?
Yeah.
My
It's
bad.
like I didn't say
Let's
that.
let's re-record that. Hey, Aaron, you remember when you? God damn it. So he wrote this. It was directed by Vincent McEventee, and I'm probably butchering that. But he is a frequent director of episodes. And when I go back and look at some of the others that he's done, he did Balance of Terror, which we all liked.
Mhm.
He did Dagger of the Mind, which only Aaron liked, but Aaron liked it. He did Miri, which we were generally okay with, minus some minor things. Like you've got the new showrunner who's kind of showing what he can do, because I don't think he'd written any episodes. He did the Changeling prior, which we liked. And then you've got a director that we pretty consistently like his episodes. So it kind of makes sense that, between the two of them, they put together something that's enjoyable, right? We like this style.
Yeah.
Um,
They had a few things come up in this one that we've seen kind of over and over again. You get that dichotomy of the unwillingness to fight, yet needing to reconcile the fact that, okay, but you and all of your people will be slaughtered. Having to reconcile that with the more pacifist leanings of certain groups in the series. There was also the you really, in this one, we see what happens in a longer term sense when that prime directive is violated. Even if he's trying to do a good thing.
Yep.
I mean, we've seen plenty of other episodes where we've been critical of Kirk for saying, like, oh yeah, prime directive be damned, I'm going to go do this because I need to save them, and basically condemn this society to death because of what revelations they make and all of those things. Here you see one possible route of violating that prime directive, and it's pretty bad.
Well, what do they say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right.
So
Now,
I think this episode kind of demonstrates that, right?
Where I felt this got kind of weirder, I guess, and where I'm not sure they knew what their even message was I wrote down, so at the end, is this almost a defense of Hitler? Because the Fuhrer is not responsible for what's going on. He's under the control of one man, a traitor. So it's like they're trying to put all of this responsibility on one guy for saying, well, he took control of this guy and then misled everybody. And now it's like everybody was absolved at the end. And it's just like, okay, 30 seconds ago, you wanted to exterminate these people, and now you're helping them. I suppose that's better than your initial plan, but everybody being absolved by this, and I get they need to wrap it up in 30 seconds, so that's what they do.
Right.
But that leaves a weird feeling.
But it is an interesting point. Is this a justification of fascism, right? To a certain extent, right?
And yeah, it's just, I think it's weird that they're saying, yes, only one person is basically saying one person is responsible for all of this. And it's not the guy who is actually sort of saying the words because he was drugged, but that was a really weird.
But what are his dying words?
Wrap it up.
What are his dying words? What's the quote? Even historians,
I messed up.
No, even mistakes. Historians fail to learn from history.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's what I wrote that down.
So in that regard, that is almost a statement of culpability of.
Well, yeah, he does say, I was wrong. The non-interference directive is the only way.
But he starts them down this path. He happens to be betrayed partway through, and then becomes, this figurehead of, someone behind the scenes pulling the strings, but he starts them down this path, knowing full well as a historian what the implications of that are. So I think that too is kind of an interesting look at it, right?
Yeah.
the man who holds that much power, even with the best intentions, just can't resist playing God. Closing line of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it isn't a justification of fascism or Nazism or all of that. It's more of a look back on how easily you can get there.
Yeah.
And what the ramifications of that are.
Yeah. And that actually wasn't the final line of the episode. It kind of continues.
That's the last thing I wrote down.
Because McCoy says that, and Spock is like, yes, thank you, Doctor. I was able to gather the meaning. And then they say again, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Darn clever, these Earthmen, wouldn't you say? And Spock says, yes, Earthmen like Ramses, Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, Hitler, Lee Kuan. Your whole Earth history is made up of men seeking absolute power. And then the banter and bickering continues.
I choose to believe that episode ended with the quote that I cited. It makes my point more profound. But
so, yeah.
Speaking of quotes, I love the Spock's quote of, "I'm beginning to understand why you Earthmen enjoy gambling. No matter how carefully one computes the odds of success, there is still a certain exhilaration in the risk. Very good, Spock. We may make a human of you yet." And without missing a beat, he goes, "I hope not." Just like this offhand, like no hesitation. Faster than I've ever heard Spock say anything. I hope not.
Yeah.
I enjoyed
Abbie,
that.
did you have a rating for this one?
I'll give it a 6. I didn't much of anything of it. I thought it was fine. I feel like it went really quickly. Like, I feel like it started, it was done immediately.
No, they moved the plot along pretty well. It did not.
No, there weren't a lot of twists and turns to it either. It was the same like main premise of, we must get to this person. I don't believe it. And sure enough, we didn't believe it. It was just, how do we get there? So it didn't really have a lot of dynamic to it in that regard. I did like some of the humor on it, which gave it a higher rating than just a 5 for me. Like McCoy showing up without his shoes on, like those things were great.
About how to put boots on, like how...
Yes, perfect.
Because they got him the wrong size.
So things like that I found interesting.
Didn't feel like the wrong size once he finally got them on, by the way.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to hear some trivia on this one?
Yeah.
Aaron, did you give this a 7?
I did.
Okay. I didn't write it down, so I just want to make sure. Okay. Yes, I'd love to hear some trivia.
Due to the post-war German ban on Nazi-related imagery and paraphernalia, this was the only Star Trek episode that was not shown on German TV until mid-1990s.
So
the uniforms...
Go ahead. No.
The uniforms were actually from Paramount's costume storage, and they were all mismatched. Like, they had different insignia, different collars, different everything. Like, one had an oak leaf, one had different things on them. None of them were, like, from the same set.
So I didn't think about that specifically from the perspective of, whether or not this episode aired in Germany. But that was a thing that I thought of a lot as I was watching this, and every time we saw like a swastika on an armband and things like that, of like Germany, banned the possession, banned the display, like anything relating to Hitler and the Nazi Party and all of that was a no-go. And it again kind of made me wonder how they pulled this episode off, right? And yes, granted, American production, yada yada yada, but it's still, to the point that we had earlier, it's very jarring. Like, it's not a thing outside of like a outside of a documentary that you see even today.
No, they went really tight on this. So the trivia states that Leonard Nimoy refused to take public pictures while in the outfit.
Yeah, because he's
begin with. Yep, as was William Shatner. And it said that a lot of the cast and crew really struggled with making this episode. Leonard Nimoy specifically didn't want pictures taken with him because he was actually attending Hanukkah services and didn't want it to be an issue later on when he actually showed up at Hanukkah services. But I was amazed. I didn't realize I'd actually done this, but like they actually used stock shots and stock footage to film that John Gill scene. So they were using that triumphant will scene, that 1935 like propaganda film, that very famous one that we've all seen. They
Yep.
actually used that to model the John Gill scene as Führer. So they were, I can't imagine how difficult that has to be. So close to reality on that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking people whose children died in this war still, like are still awake, still alive, still there. I mean, we've got Holocaust survivors who are, you know, what, 40s, 60s, even, not even
Yeah.
out of Auschwitz, even, you know, who can be watching this. So it's crazy.
Even like mid to late 20s, like children in concentration camps that now 24 years later are watching this. Like they could have been 3, 4, 5, 6 years old living in concentration camps, now living in America, seeing this episode and the impact that that would have on them. Like it's a pretty gutsy episode to do.
Yeah. I wonder
It's not.
I wonder if after this, I mean, thinking through their costumes looked a bit Hogan's Heroes-y. I never watched that, so I don't know like what
Hogan
kind of
Heroes a
imagery
Paramount
they
production, or is it the same costumes? You said that they pulled them out of the costume
Yeah.
supply. Like,
They pulled them from a lot of movies, is what
Okay.
it said.
But-
so it was taken from a bunch of the World War II era films.
I wonder if this episode, and it was jarring seeing a lot of that imagery, and maybe that's I wonder if it was jarring to the people at the time versus us today. But I was thinking of like V for Vendetta. You watch that and it's clearly all that same kind of imagery, but looks different, communicates the same message, and doesn't feel jarring in the way that this did necessarily. So I wonder if this was an episode that impacted other productions down the road to say like, hey, we can get this across, be clear with who we're representing without being that, when it's not a strict World War II movie or show. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, again, it was just jarring to see, and yeah, I don't know.
I will say that jarring isn't necessarily bad, right?
No,
and not to say that either one of you has said that that's a bad thing, but even now, sometimes we need the reminder of where we came from.
Yeah.
And how easily we could get back to where we came from.
Yeah.
So
Did we talk about even trying to not rationalize, but look at it and try to, how do I say this? So often we're encouraged to try to see the good in a situation and say, yes, this was terrible, but did you look at what this brought on, and the good things that came out of this, or the sophistication of that? I think this was very interesting in that he tried to do that in a situation that truly it's not feasible. There was not a golden side to this. There was no silver lining to this rainbow by any means. Dark is dark. You can't say just because it was a small nation state that turned into, one year away from conquering the world, I think is what they quoted. No, he thought he could change it and be everything but that. And it's like sometimes pure evil is just pure evil, and we can't try to make it anything other than what it is. And I think I'm trying to think of other situations where that's the case, because I feel like it happens more often than not, right? And we keep repeating those same mistakes, thinking we can do it differently because, oh, this is the good side of that. We just don't have to do those things that they did, like these 1, 2, 3 things that made it the bad thing. Everything else was fine, right? And Aaron and I were just talking about Rome or whatever today a little bit, and it was just like, kind of Rome. There's good things about Roman, democracy and all those kind of things, but there was a whole lot of bribery and not great stuff going on, and behind the scene murders and just ultimately corruption. It's like, can you really take even a good part of something, and can it stay truly good without being perverted by the bad? Is that even a concept that can happen? Or by nature, do we always go towards the darkness? We can't just take the good piece, and so we should, you know what I mean? It's just interesting for me, that on a philosophical standpoint.
I think it's an interesting, little bit loose, but it's an interesting comparison of this episode to City on the Edge of Forever, right? Where they talk about the consequences of saving her life, right? The immediate, consequences, she lives and Kirk is in love with her, and that's all well and good. And she goes on to, start to do some really great things. But as a result, very, very bad things happen. Right. And so you almost have the flip side here, right? Of, this was theoretically started with the best of intentions, but it, wasn't a good outcome, right? And it needed to be changed. And I know there are some parallels there, right? I don't think I have any real notes left over. Oh, I had one. If they're going to put a transponder in their wrists just in case they lose their communicators, why don't they always have a transponder? Like, why is that just not standard issue equipment of, hey, you're a, high value crew member, or just, a member of Starfleet in general. We're going to,
we wouldn't have Nemesis then.
No.
And
all these things.
And an ending. So many things would be different through all of these movies. Have that transponder piece been in there.
We're not there yet, but Star Trek 6. So yeah, it's I don't know. I thought that was interesting. That stood out to me a little bit. But yeah, beyond that, like I said, I really enjoyed the episode, and I looked for reasons to not, and I couldn't get there. So
I agree.
Any closing thoughts? Any trivia we missed on this one?
No, that was all the trivia.
Oh. Okay. One thing I saw, the lady Darius.
Mm-hmm.
Her costume originally did not have a swastika on it, and it was added right before they started filming. And her parents had fled Nazi Germany, and she was rather offended by this, and would not have taken the role if she'd known that's what her costume would be. And after this episode, she quit acting.
Oh.
Yeah.
Trauma, baby. Trauma response. I mean, it can be fake, but
again,
triggering. Oh my gosh, she's living all this. Oh, can't even imagine.
Again, it's like this is going, like, relative to today. This is like going back to 9/11. It's not that long ago.
This would be like,
which is crazy to think about. One, how far removed we are from that, but how not far removed we are from all of that this is 23 years, 22 and a half years after the end of World War II.
So parallel to that,
not very long.
If, one of her parents had been killed on 9/11 or fought in the, the war afterwards and killed, severely injured, whatever, by Al-Qaeda, and then you're gonna, wear something emblematic of Al-Qaeda.
Right.
It's crazy.
It's crazy to think in terms of that kind of time frame too. It's like we've had those fun thoughts in some of the other ones, like City on the Edge of Forever, where it's just like, this would be like going back to 1983. I mean, this is even closer in time to when this was filming and aired. Yeah, it's an interesting episode. It's interesting to try to process, like, who thought this was a good idea, and then still say somehow it kind of worked.
Well, and I think that's why it gave us so much to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Compared
And maybe
to
that's got to be a good thing. I mean, it's not like in any of it they're just like, hey, let's have a conversation here and give both sides equal weight and say that, hey, maybe they're onto something here, because that's not at all what they're going at in this episode. It's like,
no.
this is the epitome of evil. We've seen this before, and we need to stop this shit now.
Mm-hmm.
They did say that very clearly. I will say one thing that did right in this episode, they made it very apparent from the very beginning that they were disgusted by this.
Yes.
Why is this here? Why would he ever try to model this again?
Yeah,
John Gill is a
Yeah.
good man. A good man would never do this. This makes zero sense.
Yep.
So they definitely drew that point home very, very clearly. So it wasn't ever a question of, oh, is this good or bad? It was,
No,
Kirk just
no, it
couldn't figure out how this person he knew who was inherently
And
good
respected.
would do something so evil. That's what he was like, something doesn't add up. This is so evil. Everyone knows this is evil. So why is John Gill, who's a good man and a good historian, know not to do this? So that's where they just didn't believe it.
Yeah. I wonder, so this one, each of the episodes we watched for this week got progressively higher ratings on IMDb. The first one was at 6.8 for I'm even blanking on the name of it.
Private Little War.
A Private Little War. The second one, Return to Tomorrow, was 7.4, and this one on IMDb is rated 7.5. So, I mean, it's a decently rated episode. I'm curious how it was received then. Like, culturally and all that, because again,
I feel like with enough time we could comb through like newspapers and the time to figure out.
But I mean, like, in a way, we do have similar things that come up now, given different things. I think of like the first couple seasons of Homeland, kind of a similar thing, even though that's way more ambiguous too in the morality behind it, whereas this was not morally ambiguous at all. It was just very direct in this episode. But I mean, yeah, we see things like Homeland done more currently, given more recent events and things like that, and I suppose we receive that fairly well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do. And I think that the thing we struggle, or the thing that I struggle with, is the size and scope. I'm not going to diminish what happened on 9/11 and in the years afterwards.
Yeah.
But it still was nowhere near the size and scope of even Vietnam or Korea, much less World War II. Right. So I think while it is the most significant event of our lifetimes, because I'm sure both of you know exactly where you were on 9/11, and will, for the rest of your lives be able to tell that story, as will I. It's still a little different than the sheer atrocities that happened in the Holocaust. So,
and I'm not trying to make that a moral equivalence. No. But just trying to say anecdotally how that might, how something like that could be even in the same arena for our experience, looking back at prior events and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. Good episode.
Yeah. Now I want to start digging through like newspapers around the time and see if we can figure out, like, what was the reaction? What did people think of this?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Let's see, Wikipedia can
What was
tell us
that?
stuff like that.
I'm sure.
Perception. No, it just says that it was not run. It was considered unfit for entertainment in Germany
Well, I mean, you want
at
to
the
talk about
time.
a country that was still trying to figure out
Yeah,
for decades afterwards what their identity was post World War
right.
II. I get it.
Was that all three?
Yeah,
We did it. We kind of skipped over the first one, but we found lots to talk
this wasn't
about
very good.
second and third one.
Well, there you go. It can be difficult to get a read on this series sometimes. I can see generally how it was a progressive show for its time, but then there are some very convoluted messages. On the one hand, war is bad, but on the other hand, mutually assured destruction is the only way to maintain peace. Which one is it? I get that there's nuance in life. In reality, things are rarely just black or white, entirely good or entirely bad, and there is value in nuanced conversation. But that can be difficult to execute in a show without using crazy amounts of exposition to get the points across. So when an episode seemingly tries to play both sides of an issue with near equal weight, it can be a bit unsatisfying. It goes to show how difficult it must be to make a show, period, not just this one, especially if you try to tackle big issues. In many episodes, I think Star Trek does it quite well. Maybe it's just this one missed the mark a little bit. Now, changing gears, I enjoy seeing the context in which an episode was produced. A series taking place 300 years in the future is still grounded in the time in which it aired. We are aware of the Apollo missions today in 2025, but I can only imagine how much more those references would land in 1968. In January 1967, over a year before Return to Tomorrow aired, Apollo 1 ended in a tragedy with a fire on the launch pad, killing the 3 astronauts on board. The next manned mission was Apollo 7, launching on October 11, 1968, over 8 months after the episode aired. The episode simply assumes that the Apollo program would be successful and get us to the moon. I like that. I like when shows call their shots. I know it's a numbers game, and given enough predictions, some are bound to be correct. But it sure is fun when they are, like Parks and Rec calling the Cubs World Series victory in 2016, or any predictions from The Simpsons. Maybe the best part of those moments is the glimpse into the culture of that time. Like I said, while these episodes are set 300 years in the future, they're still grounded in the late 1960s. I've noticed similar things while Abbie and I are rewatching Futurama. It's interesting to get a look back into what we were anticipating 25 years ago and to see how some of those things have developed. Can you believe Futurama started 25 years ago? But I digress. Anyway, if you're watching along with us, next week we will be discussing the next 3 episodes of the original series, By Any Other Name, The Omega Glory, and The Ultimate Computer. As always, if you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. For Abbie and Nate, this is Aaron reminding you to never give up, never surrender.
And I think I kept trying to find reasons to dislike this episode, but I actually kind of liked it.